men can be negotiated with, and they're negotiating as I'm recording this. They're negotiating right now. And so it's certainly at the threat of war, but without the need for one. All right. Now, obviously, after I recorded this, the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu, went ahead and launched what became known as the 12-Day War, named that by Donald Trump, in June of 2025. They bombed Iranian nuclear sites and also government sites. They attempted to achieve some kind of regime change by bombing, government leaders and so forth, threatening military men that they better overthrow the government or else the Israelis would kill their families and this kind of thing. That didn't go anywhere. They were able to degrade Iran's infrastructure to a degree, except that ultimately they had to call in the B-2s, just as those of us who had opposed this kind of policy all along had warned the Israelis can't finish the job. They'll need to drag the Americans into it. Although, we'll get to that in a minute, it could have been a lot worse as far as how we got dragged into it. But ultimately, they needed American B-2s to try to take out the Fordo and Natanz nuclear facilities. And the Americans and the Israelis both hit the Isfahan conversion facility, where they convert the metal to uranium hexafluoride gas and back again after enrichment. So now the extent of the damage is not known for certain, although there were multiple reports out, including one by David Albright at ISIS, which it was called that before the Islamic State came around. But anyway, they did kind of a pretty thorough report on this and seemed to show extensive damage to Fordo and Natanz. I think later reports said that Fordo was more heavily damaged than Natanz. Seymour Hersh wrote a piece saying they didn't really have to destroy everything down in the underground facility, although they were trying to. But what was most important was them collapsing all the air vents and any different kinds of tunnels that they could. And the Iranians also blocked the tunnels themselves with boulders and so forth before the strikes. So it's unclear, but I guess as far as we know now, as of late summer 2025, they have not attempted to dig a mine shaft down there and reopen Fordo as of yet. Natanz is said to be in better shape and still partially operational, I believe. And then the Iranians also had at least claimed that they have another secret facility that they're ready to open and start enriching uranium there. They vowed that they are not going to stop enriching uranium. On the other hand, they've also said, undermine at least, that they haven't changed their policy on nuclear weapons, and they still are not seeking nuclear weapons. They don't need them, don't want them, but you still can't make us stop enriching. Now, it's a reasonable fear that that's a lie, and that now, as anti-war people have warned for a generation now, they are more likely to go ahead and break out and try to get a nuclear weapon in order to defend themselves. They had this latent nuclear deterrent as a threshold nuclear weapon state, and then Benjamin Netanyahu and ultimately Donald Trump called their bluff. And so now I guess they're just going back to bluffing. We'll have to wait and see. But the IAEA inspectors were kicked out of the country because they were credibly accused of acting as spies and helping to coordinate the attacks. So there is a broken chain. We used to be able to say, hey, we know the IAEA has verified the non-diversion of nuclear material in Iran to any military or other special purpose. They'd bring up all these objections from time to time, but it was always little stuff and it was always explained away. There's never any real question of them diverting their nuclear material to a weapons program. But now there's a break in the chain of surveillance. And it is possible that they could even say, look, we still have a civilian program, but now they have a parallel secret program. I'm not accusing them of that, and I'm not joining up with the war party, saying that, that must be true now or whatever. But at the same time, it's much more likely now than ever. And of course, it's easy for politicians to lie. I mean, that's not a problem. If the inspection chain is broken, we have to at least fear the worst, if not assume the worst, to come from that, which means, of course, that the war's not over. If Donald Trump has, it was a controversy that Tulsi Gabbard had repeated what the intelligence community, the entire National Intelligence Council concluded in 2007 and repeatedly ever since, that they don't have a nuclear weapons program. that the Ayatollah has not made a choice to begin to try to develop nuclear weapons. And she had testified that, well, first of all, they put out their report in February. Then she testified to the Senate about that in March. And then she had reaffirmed that to the White House just a week before the strikes. And they were in the middle of talks. And then when confronted, she said, hey, look, they're still weeks away. Well, yeah, a lot of weeks. And that's if they were to begin to try to break out and make one. Bit dishonest on her part, but I'm a little bit looking the other way because I like seeing her persecute Russiagate malefactors and so forth. But anyway, that was very disingenuous as far as excuse making. But it's sort of just like what George W. Bush did in 2002. If you read even the classified version, either version of the NIE of 2002, the National Intelligence Council says, we think that Saddam has some chemical weapons, but we don't think he would ever attack the United States with them unless perhaps if we invaded, he might use them in defense of the capital city or something like that. But give them to terrorists to attack the United States, we don't assess that that is a reasonable possibility. Well, W. Bush read that and said, well, I disagree. You say he's got chemical weapons, that's all I need to hear. I assess the danger differently than you. So that's what Trump's doing here. Oh, Tulsi Gabbard says they're not making nuclear weapons? Well, I think they are. Meaning essentially adopting the Israelis' frame that if they have civilian enrichment of uranium at all, to whatever percent, that's the same thing as they're making nukes, and they're not allowed to have enrichment at all. And he just made that up. That's not the law. And the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 guarantees the right to peaceful nuclear technology. That's why they have a safeguards agreement with the IAEA, and we're not supposed to bomb them and break that chain of surveillance so that we know that they've not diverted their nuclear material to a military purpose. Now, one of the giant lies of this whole escapade was that, well, they're enriching up to 60%. What do you think that means, right? And then you're just supposed to extrapolate out from your imagination. That was what Marco Rubio said, making his excuses, the Secretary of State, and Mike Baker, the CIA agent on the Joe Rogan show. He goes, well, Joe, 60%, something. I mean, come on, right? Like, you know what I mean? Huh? Right? He's got nothing. He can't explain. He's got only non sequiturs. What does it mean that they're enriching up to 60%? It means they're not enriching up to weapons grade. Why they stop at 60? It was simply for leverage. We all know exactly what happened if you just look at the record. That's why antiwar.com is here. That in Donald Trump's lame duck period in December of 2020, the Israelis, using the MEK communist terrorist cult, used a booby trap automatic machine gun and murdered the head of Iran's nuclear program, Fakhrizadeh. Then in April of 21, they did a sabotage attack on the Natanz nuclear enrichment facility, which they boasted about and said that they did it. And it was only in response to that Iran started reaching up to 20% again, which is still within the realm of legitimacy, at least. It's a chip to play, but it's also necessary to have 20% enriched uranium for targets for their medical isotope reactors. But they only need a little bit of that at a time. There's only so much demand on the world market for it. So, and which is not buying from them. So this is a bargaining chip too. And that was after Fakhrizadeh was killed. And then after the Natanz sabotage, then they started reaching up to 60%, which is useless. The only thing you can do with that is negotiate it away. What they're saying is, hey man, get back in the deal. We had a deal, just get back in the deal. That's what they're trying to do, or get an equivalent deal. And they were in the middle of negotiations with the Trump administration, which understood the 60% uranium, enriched uranium-235 to be exactly that. The idea was, well, we'll dilute it back down again, turn it into fuel rods, burn it in the reactor, it'll be fine. They were in the middle of negotiations on this. Now, there's a question, Steve Witkoff, Trump's real estate friend and sort of ambassador at large, he says that, no, the Israelis surprised us with this. We had scheduled a meeting with the Iranians for Sunday. We were going to show up. That was real. And then the Israelis launched the surprise attack. And now he just may have not been in the loop, because it's also true that the administration has started pulling military assets out of the Gulf. And just, I think, 2 days before the strikes began. I had heard rumors that the strikes are going to begin in a couple of days, and then they did. And then it was funny because I didn't say that. I'd heard that. And then it happened. And then I heard that America's going to jump in as soon as tomorrow night or tonight or tomorrow night, whatever it was. So I posted that, and then that didn't happen for another week. And then what was the third thing I heard that was also right? I guess that they were going to cease fire or whatever it was. I can't remember. There's a third thing. Anyway, the one that I posted online was the one that took a few more days to come true and made me look funny, but whatever. My source was right on all three of those. It was a single source, I admit, but a good one. And anyway, but now, so here's where I was wrong and a lot of people were wrong. First of all, the Israelis and then the Americans had a very easy time with Iranian anti-aircraft. The Russian SM-300s were nothing. The Israelis just took them out on the way in, or they had sabotage attacks by, Mossad agents and assets inside the country where they had isolated, probably with American intelligence help, they had isolated all of the anti-aircraft batteries and they just took them all out. And they had air superiority and even dominance virtually from the very beginning. Not one Israeli plane was shot down. And the Americans came in with their B-2s. They encountered no resistance whatsoever. So that was important. And I had actually said on Pierce Morgan or something, old information, that it would take special operations forces to go in there with their laser designators to really take out all that anti-aircraft. And they didn't want to do that. It was too big of a risk. Well, Mossad did it. And then also at the same time, they didn't really need their laser designators as much as before. The technology had advanced where they could really just laser targets from above and then hit them. And so whatever, through combinations of that, they rendered Iranian anti-aircraft virtually, completely ineffective. And then was, of course, the Iranians' big bluff that they could use, and which they never said this, but it was obviously implicit in the whole thing. And actually, the Ayatollah never said this. I'm sure IRGC types and whatever has spouted off about this before, that they would and could attack our troops in Iraq, which we still have thousands of troops in Iraq, finally out of Afghanistan, reinvaded Iraq in 2014, still had minor, really reinvaded in 14 and stayed again ever since then. About 5,000 troops in Baghdad and up in Iraqi Kurdistan. We got, I don't know how many, tens of thousands, 50,000, 40,000 something troops in Kuwait. And then I don't know the numbers exactly, but in Bahrain, we have the 5th Fleet naval station. And in Qatar, we have an air base, the Al Ulid Air Base. I always pronounce it wrong. That's also the home of Central Command. And so, and then not to mention just $1 trillion worth of economic targets all up and down the Gulf. And military bases also in Saudi Arabia and UAE as well, I believe. And so essentially all our guys were held hostage by Iranian short-range missiles and medium-range missiles that can hit us from across the Gulf. We have great defenses, but not that great. And they could be overwhelmed. And so this was always the question of how a war with Iran might go. If you go back to David Wurmser and Dick Cheney talking tough in 2007, remember part of their plan when they couldn't get Bush to strike inside Iran over the EFP hoax was they wanted to arrange the Israelis to attack Iran, and then that would force Iran to attack American assets in the Gulf. And that would be an end run that would force W. Bush to go ahead and launch the war against Iran, because it was just presumed that the war would escalate. The Ayatollah would take an Israeli attack as an American one, and the war would immediately, we would be dragged in like the hard way, right? And of course, at that time, we had a couple 100,000 soldiers in Iraq War II who were essentially embedded all with Shiites who were loyal to Iran. Again, the Sadrists were the least loyal to Iran, but they had said, I believe the exact quote from the Badr Brigade was, "We would do our duty." And then, geez, I can't remember. I used to know it by heart. What was the quote from Muqtada al-Sadr? It was whatever. He'd made it clear that he would also side with Badr against the Americans. So they'd have been all shot in the back like Order 66, right? By their own allies in the war if we had started attacking Iran then. That was the thinking then. So now what happened this time was the Ayatollah didn't dare hit our guys in Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar. They launched 14 missiles, which was purely symbolic. Trump dropped 14 bombs from the B-2s. The Ayatollah authorized the firing of 14 missiles, and then he called in advance and warned the Americans, we're going to launch 14 symbolic missiles. Please shoot them down and protect yourselves, which they did. And if any of them got through, no one was hurt. And Donald Trump even tweeted out on his Truth Social thing that thank you so much, Ayatollah, for the warning that you were about to fire these missiles. So now they did retaliate with missile salvos against Israel to a great degree. But the Ayatollah was signaling there that he didn't dare want to escalate this war with the United States of America. Is he willing to give up enrichment? No. Is he willing to go ahead and provoke the wrath of Donald Trump, who, after all, is armed with H-bombs and a hell of a lot of conventional air-delivered munitions and naval ship-delivered munitions as well? And so, Trump had threatened during the war on his Truth Social account. He said, evacuate Tehran, which, like he wasn't going to nuke them, but the idea was, geez, he could carpet bomb the city. Or, it's kind of sounded like what he meant. Or at least maybe a minor version of that was he's going to start bombing government targets, not just military targets, but all sorts of government targets in the capital city. And that nobody should be anywhere nearby at that time. I mean, that's a pretty dangerous threat from the President of the United States of America, sitting on top of this Army and Navy, this Air Force and Navy particularly, and the danger it poses to any state. It's insane that he would threaten like that. But, and at one point even, there was a report that the White House had decided that no matter what, they were not going to use nukes. And then they put out a statement saying, that's not true. All options remain on the table, which is just unforgivable. And they could have just said nothing, even if that report was not true, that they had decided that. They didn't have to say that. And again, threatening to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon state when it's America's ally that started the war, dragged us in to finish it, so they can't hit the targets that they want to hit. Pretty bold, and I'm sure criminal under the letter of the law. But anyway, it turns out at least that, thank goodness, Ayatollah isn't the madman that they always claim he is. The Israelis and their sock puppets in America always say that, the Ayatollah would be perfectly happy to have Israel launch all 200 nukes that they have at him, as long as he could get one off at them and this kind of thing. No, he's clearly a calm and rational and patient guy. He's going to wait till he has that one nuke, I guess. If he's even making one at all now. But I think with Donald Trump adopting the Israelis' frame that Iran is now forbidden by his edict from having enrichment, that puts us on course for just the next stage in this war. And it's actually unbelievable, but true, that Trump was asked at a press conference or at a cabinet meeting, are we going to go back to war with Iran over their nuclear program? And he said, well, that's a question that's best posed to the prime minister. He is the one who gets to decide for the rest of us. And so he seemed to be sincere that, like, yeah, that's who decides. And so they call it the 12-day war, but I think it is not over yet. They have not succeeded. There's no need to put up a mission accomplished banner because they did not accomplish the what? The complete and total obliteration, as Donald Trump said, of Iran's nuclear program. They did not achieve that. And there's no such thing anyway. You'd have to abolish every last aluminum smelter in Persia too. Because as long as they can make the tubes, as long as they have uranium mines, they can build a deeper tunnel, build a conversion facility, and start enriching uranium again. Then you're at the point where, now we need regime change. If the Ayatollah is never going to back down and his successors are never going to back down, I guess we got to go in there and kill every last Shiite cleric we can find till there's no one left to call himself supreme leader anymore. Reinstall the monarch's son. That was the grandson. That's the kind of logical trap that they have, rigged for themselves, the path that they've set themselves on. Although at least the good news is Trump can change his mind about any of this stuff at any time. But does it seem like that is his want when it comes to issues related to the whims and will of the Prime Minister of Israel? Not that I can think of.
All right, I just want to cover some of the stuff Scott did in that last part there. Obviously, he recorded that at the end of 2025. I think he said December 2025. So we were not clearly in yet to the war that started in February, but he wasn't too far off. He said that he didn't believe that the war was over, and man, did he hit the nail on the head with that. They kind of painted themselves into a corner. Then there at the end, you saw um, that, I think this was probably reported on at the time, but we didn't pay as much attention to it as we probably should have, at least if you're the average individual. I know I remember hearing it, but didn't really think too much of it. Um, but he said, if the war was to continue with Iran, it would be up to the prime minister. And that's so telling about everything we're dealing with right now. The reason we can't get out of this war, the reason we won't pull out. And then it seems that we should have been super thankful for the Ayatollah Khamenei, um, who we killed in strikes and bomb strikes. I don't know if we killed him or Israel killed him, but either way, he was murdered in those strikes, along with part of the family of his son, his wife, and his children, and stuff like that. And so, seems like that guy was the only thing that was really helping us kind of keep that regional hegemony going, and the fact that we were, um, you know, dominating the region, I guess is not how I want to say, because we didn't have full control of everything, but we had the most significant presence of anyone in the Middle East region, especially with the GCC countries. And then obviously with Israel being our ally, and then we have good relations with Jordan and Egypt, which surround Israel. um, and then Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, all that stuff. And see, and back in 2007, we had the same problem. You heard it from Scott, about the air base that was in Qatar, destroyed now. The base is in Bahrain, destroyed now. Like, all of these assets were still a problem in 2007, and 20 years later, almost 20 years later, they were still the problem, of which we finally ran into a president that was dumb enough to um, say fuck it and not care about the assets we had in the Gulf Coast countries, and really test our might and our will. And you heard Scott. Everybody had this sort of idea that our naval superiority and our air force superiority and all those types of things that we had has really, I'm not saying he didn't say it, because we talked about the Strait of Hormuz, and that was always the key issue and why they didn't want to do it, because of how much energy flows through that. But it also matters that, it was just kind of this idea that they would capitulate. And now we're seeing, with the fact that they're not capitulating, is really bringing to the forefront the fact that we don't have regional hegemony anymore, and we have elevated Iran. And these were all fears that were very valid prior to this. And that none of this Iran war was ever about American interests. This was always about Israeli interests, along with the terror wars. The only guy that we even sought to make sure died was Osama bin Laden. We went after Muammar Gaddafi in Libya because he was trying to unite the African nations and create the dinar to be a rival currency. And we had to put a stop to that. So, and I know that seems off topic, but it's just, none of these targets in the Middle East especially seem to have been really for American interests, at least not of the American people, and hardly of the American government. It was really these neocon sort of Israel first warmongers that not only profited from it, but believed in what Israel was trying to do, and has always been roping us into. And we were never of sovereign choice to do this stuff. So I think it's really interesting that if you pay anyone who pays attention to this, and I unfortunately started paying attention a little too late, and wasn't even, really paying attention during the 12-day war and all this kind of stuff. I really didn't get into this except for the last like 9 months, when I really started paying attention and listening. Um, but you can see that anybody with a brain was worried that this war was not over, and oh, how right they were. And the same playbook from 2003 has been dusted off and getting reused. And they can't have nuclear weapons. Then they'd switch it to no nuclear enrichment, and we have to go in and do regime change and all of this stuff, when really none of this is beneficial to us. Yeah, you could say, no, they don't need nuclear weapons, but the previous Ayatollah had a fatwa, which I explained in a previous part, that nuclear weapons were not on the table. And as Scott said, they enriched up to 60%. And then everyone had a non sequitur about the 60%. And I stated previously that it was reported on one of Carlson's episodes that 60% was a Hiroshima bomb. Like, yeah, it would do some damage, but we could annihilate theirs, and they might put a crater in the middle of a city. Which, listen, I don't want to speak lightly on that, but if you're talking about just terms of firepower, it's not as detrimental or as devastating. So there was just this kind of idea that escalation dominance lied with the United States because Iran always capitulated, because they had a reasonable Ayatollah in power, but now his son's in power, and you've killed some of his family and killed his father, and he realizes that he has nothing to lose, and so he's just pushing this as far as it'll go, and he's also realizing that we don't hold the escalation dominance. If anything, this is more of a stalemate, where they can't force us to capitulate, but we can't force them to capitulate either. And the reality is, I saw earlier that there's possibly that Qatar early on in the war had tried to strike a secret deal with Iran to shut off gas to America to try to pressure them to end the war. And we don't know, things get reported and they have to be verified by multiple sources. But let me say that it makes a lot of sense that the GCC countries would take the time to try and reach out to Iran, because Iran has the ability to touch them, and we have shown that we don't have the ability to protect them, nor do we care to protect them. And these are, countries that have kind of thrown their weight around without the ability to back it. And now the bill is coming due, so to speak, and they're realizing that, oh, America can't protect us and we can't protect ourselves. Um, so I would definitely be concerned about how this affects our regional influence. And then, the global influence that we possess is definitely taking a massive hit, and realize that, if you're just a large country, you don't even have to be non-nuclear, or you have to be nuclear. You could be a non-nuclear large country. We still don't have the capability to mostly overthrow regimes if they have some kind of, what do you call it, resource deprivation available, you know. And there's been reports that, we might run into a food shortage, and we're already looking down the barrel of an energy crisis. And so the longer this goes on, the more guys like Scott and a Dave Smith, John Mearsheimer, these people are going to look more and more like fucking clairvoyants, even though all they did was follow the patterns. Um, but I just wanted to touch on some of that stuff. I hope you guys like these episodes that I put together. I really thought what Scott was talking about here was super important. I know some of it can get a little kind of sloggy with some of the details. He's a very, very detailed guy. And I know that for most of us, these details do seem to be partially irrelevant. But I hope there's a lot of information that you pulled out of this. I appreciate you for tuning in. And we look forward to the next time we see you. I am going to do a sort of montage type, maybe a 2 or 3 parter of some Tucker Carlson interviews recently that I have listened to that I really thought were pretty good. He did one with a Gaza scientist, or not a scientist, what, healthcare professional, doctor? That might have been what it was. That I thought was really interesting, where he talked about how the Palestinians were being treated, especially in the hospitals, or if they were prisoners of war. But anyway, we'll get to that when we get to that. In the meantime, everybody, stay frosty. Have yourself a good week. I'll see you later.